Hello there, boys and girls. Welcome to iTTV. In today's lesson, I'll be explaining to you about the concepts of lines and angles, particularly the concept of transversals and parallel lines. Well, boys and girls, what do we mean by transversal? A transversal is basically a line that intersects two or more parallel lines. Therefore, when we have two or more parallel lines, and if there is another line that cuts through these two or more parallel lines, we call this line a transversal. Let us look into the diagram in the screen. If you look into the picture or the diagram here, we have two parallel lines, those being line PQ and line MN. If you look further, there is another line that cuts line PQ and MN, which is known as KT. Therefore, KT is what we call a transversal. It is a very simple concept. Therefore, line KT being a transversal, line PQ and MN are the parallel lines. Now, the next question or the next issue that you need to consider is when the two parallel lines, both PQ and MN, are cut by the transversal KT, we find that angles in the same relative position on the parallel lines and are on the same side of the transversal are equal. Well, boys and girls, do not be afraid with these large words. I will make this subject very easy to understand. Without further ado, let us proceed further. Now, when we mention about these angles, they are called corresponding angles, and hence corresponding angles are equal. In this diagram, let us look into further elaboration. Examples of corresponding angles are angle B and angle F. The question that you need to ask here is, how can I identify B and F to be a corresponding angle? If you look into the description given to the corresponding angle, B and F are on the same side of the parallel lines. Therefore, B and F would be a corresponding angle. Other pairs of corresponding angles which are also equal would be angle A and angle E. Likewise, angle D is equal to angle H, and finally, angle C is equal to angle G. Now, boys and girls, you have to look into corresponding angles very carefully. Firstly, you have to identify the issue of corresponding angles, what angles are equal. The next question is, when you talk about equal, how much are they equal to? Let me give you an example. Let us say I say angle B, the value is 50 degrees. Therefore, angle F, being a corresponding angle to B, will also carry the amount equal, that is being 50 degrees. This is an important issue. Steps to identify corresponding angle is you have to identify who or which angles are corresponding angles. Secondly, what are their respective values? Now, let's look into this question. The question here is, we have two parallel lines we have a value of 78, 76 and 102. We have two other unknown angles labeled X and Y. Question is, find the values of the unknown angles in the diagram above. When you look very closely to this question here, let us solve for angle X first. When you look very closely to X, we will find that X and the angle 102 is actually a corresponding angle. Therefore, the value of X should read 102 degrees. The next question is, what about angle Y then? Likewise, angle Y and angle 76 degrees is a corresponding angle. Therefore, the value of Y should read as 76 degrees. So, therefore, the correct answer to this issue would be X is equivalent to 102 degrees and Y equals to 76 degrees. Well, boys and girls, it is important for you to know the concepts of corresponding angles. I hope you have taken down some important points on this issue. Now, let us look into other issues. In the diagram above, we find that angles on opposite relative sides of the parallel lines and are on opposite sides of the transversal are equal. These are called alternate angles, and hence alternate angles are equal. Like your corresponding angles, which are equal, alternate angles are also equal. Now, you have to be very careful here. Just because they are equal, that does not mean that they are the same. Why is this so? Because corresponding angles have different properties, and alternate angles have different properties altogether. When I talk about properties, I'm talking about the identification of the angles themselves. How am I going to identify whether they are a corresponding angle or an alternate angle? I'll be further explaining this in a short while. Well, boys and girls, let us now look into the concepts of alternate angles. Let us turn our attention to the diagram. We have two parallel lines, that is PQ and MN. The examples of pairs of alternate angles are angle E and angle C. If you look very carefully, angle E and angle C would be an alternate angle. Likewise, angle B and angle H are also alternate angles. So therefore, boys and girls, thus far we have learnt two main angles, that being corresponding angles and alternate angles. Now, the other angle that is formed when a transversal cuts two parallel lines is known as the interior angle, or it is also known as allied angles. Now, if you look into the diagram, in the diagram above, we find that angles on the parallel lines facing each other and are on the same side of the transversal adds up to 180 degrees. These are called interior angles, and hence interior angles are supplementary in nature. That is, they add up to 180 degrees. If you look into the examples, angle B and E are interior angles. Once we know that these are interior angles, the next issue that needs to be considered is what is the total of this angle. Their total would add up to 180 degrees. Likewise, angle C and H is also an interior angle. Likewise, it adds up to 180 degrees. So therefore, boys and girls, in our lesson today, under the concept of parallel lines and transversal, three main angles need to be identified. What are those angles? The first being corresponding angles, next is the alternate angles, and finally would be the interior angles. These three angles is very important for you to identify, and you must understand what are their values. Firstly, when you talk about both the corresponding angles and the alternate angles, they are equal in nature. Unlike the interior angles, where the sum adds up to 180 degrees. These three main angles need to be taken down seriously. Well, boys and girls, let us look into the diagram. If you look into the diagram, we have many alphabets around the parallel lines. One of the issues that needs to be considered here is identify a pair of corresponding angles. Now, if you look very closely, angle B and angle F is actually a corresponding angle. So that would be your answer for this diagram. Next issue is identify a pair of alternate angles. Now, when you talk about alternate angles, if you look very closely, angle D and angle E. Angle D and angle E are alternate angles, so that would be your answer. Next issue is identify a pair of interior angles. Now, if you look very closely, angle C and angle E would constitute to be the interior angle. So, the identification of their respective angles is very important. Well, boys and girls, having explained thus far, some of you may be still confused in the identification of the angles. Now, I'm going to make life very easy for you. I'm trying to make mathematics as simple as possible for you. Therefore, I'm going to take time to draw something out on the board so that you will be able to understand much more clearer. Therefore, when you look into this diagram that I'm going to draw, you will find that the identification of these angles will become much more simpler. Well, boys and girls, I've mentioned to you earlier the issues of corresponding angles, alternate angles, and interior angles. On our board here, I've drawn these three angles for you. The issue that we need to consider here is how am I going to know whether A and B is a corresponding angle, or C and D is an alternate angle, and E and F is an interior angle. Now, when you get questions in your exams, there is no hard and fast rule about the application of these angles. What I'm trying to say here is any one of these angles can be applied. So therefore, in your exams, you can use corresponding angles to find the particular angle, or even alternate angles, likewise your interior angles. Now, many a times, although students understand what are corresponding angles, alternate angles, and interior angles are, but the question is, they may still find it difficult to find how do I know whether it's corresponding, alternate, and interior. Now, this is where I'm trying to teach you a simpler method to find. When you talk about corresponding angles, what you need to find is the letter F. So therefore, boys and girls, in order for me to find corresponding angles, we need to find the alphabet F. Of course, you may not find this in your regular textbooks, but this is my creation for you so that mathematics becomes easy. When you find the letter F, let me put this down for you first. Now, in this diagram, you find that there are two parallel lines. Now, where is the F that I'm going to find? When I say the F here, I'm talking about this lines across. Please remember, these two parallel lines must be involved in the equation. Therefore, when you look into these two parallel lines and I have a transversal going down, it seems to me as though this looks like the alphabet F. Now, when I can capture the alphabet F, these two angles, one in and one outside, is what I call the corresponding angles. Likewise, if I have another value here, let us say for our lesson today, I put this to be F. So therefore, this F value is corresponding to this side, G. Now, when you look upside, it will be another F on the other side. So this line, and this side. So the F is on the inverse side. Whether it is on this side or on the inverse side, it does not matter. So long you can capture the alphabet F, we call this a corresponding angle. Therefore, life will become very easy. So in your exam, you look out for the letter F. You draw these lines across to get these two parallel lines and a transversal down. You will tell me that A is equivalent to B. So therefore, A and B are equal in nature and A and B are corresponding angles. I hope you have understood thus far. What about the issue of alternate angles? For alternate angles, I also have the alphabet. The alphabet that I'm going to use here is the letter Z. When you talk about the letter Z, how do I know whether C and D is an alternate angle? If you look into the picture, we have this line here. So if you look into this line, I did mention to you, these two parallel lines must be involved. Likewise, this is a parallel line and this is also a parallel line. Therefore, it seems to me it brings up the letter Z. Therefore, angle C and angle D is known as alternate angles and the values are equal. Let us change the story. What happens if I have another angle here? Let us say it is A and we have a B here. It does not matter. Why? I can create a Z on this side. That means the Z comes from here all the way down and all the way across this way. So you can see a Z being formed. So therefore, A and B is also equal. Now, this is very important because students will tend to tell me that A and B on this picture is equal, A and B or C and D is equal. That is pretty simple to do. But the question is, what type of angle? The identification of the angle is problematic. That is the reason why I've created these alphabets for you, so that it's easy for you to understand. Well, boys and girls, let us now turn our attention to the interior angle. Like the corresponding angle and the alternate angle, interior angle also carries an alphabet. The alphabet that is being carried here would be a U. A squarish U, I would say. Now, how do I know whether it is a U here? If you look into this diagram, I'm going to draw these lines here. These two parallel lines are involved. And can you see that the existence of U, a squarish U here, comes into play? But the question is here, unlike corresponding angles and alternate angles where their angles are equal, this is not the same case for your interior angle. For interior angles, the sum of the angles, that is angle E and angle F, amounts to 180 degrees. So therefore, it is pretty easy for us to grasp the concepts of angles under parallel lines. Let me just recap or summarize what you have learned so far. For corresponding angles, look out for the alphabet F. For alternate angle, look out for Z, and finally for interior angles, look out for the squarish U. Therefore, boys and girls, what is important in our lesson today is, what are the key features of our lesson? What can I summarize about our lesson? There are a few things that I need to tell you and emphasize how important these issues are. First issue is the issue of transversal. Now, if you look into these diagrams, we have the letter P and letter T. PT, the line PT is known as the transversal. Likewise here, we have a PT here, we have a PT here. All these lines PT are known as transversal. That is the first issue. The next point here is, what are the type of angles created by a transversal when it cuts two or more parallel lines? This is where the concepts of corresponding angles, alternate angles, and finally interior angles come into play. That's point number 2. Point number 3 is, how do I identify or how can I see whether that angle is a corresponding angle, alternate angle, or an interior angle? This is where I've made your life easy by looking into the alphabets. If you are finding for a corresponding angle, try to create a letter F, like in this diagram. We have A and B being equal amount, meaning to say A and B is a corresponding angle by looking at the letter F. Likewise, to find alternate angles, you got to find the letter Z. So when you look into this Z shape, C and D is equal, therefore C and D are alternate angles. So the issue of corresponding angles and alternate angles, although their values are equal, but this A and B is under corresponding angle. C and D is alternate angles. And finally, the interior angle, we have to identify the squarish U. What is important here, boys and girls, is unlike corresponding angles and alternate angles where their angles are equal, under the interior angles, let's say angle E and F, their sum must be 180 degrees. That is the trick here. So whenever you find an interior angle, you must remember at the back of your head that the sum of the interior angle is 180 degrees. So therefore, these two angles may not be the same. But I have to caution you that it could be a tricky question in your examination. But for now, at least, I have made this particular subject under parallel lines much more easier for you to understand. So therefore, I hope you appreciate this subject much more readily. In your coming exams, I'm sure you would be able to understand and answer the questions relating to parallel lines and transversal much more readily. Well, boys and girls, we have come to the end of our lesson for today. I'll be seeing you in the next lesson. Definitely, we'll be seeing more calculations and challenging questions to come. Till then, I hope to see you then. Bye for now.